Hi, everyone. I'm Corey. We're back today with another language arts webinar. Today, we're going to be doing professional email and letter writing. This is a super valuable skill for living in today's world. All of the different language arts courses and webinars that we've been doing, I think have one thing in common, and that's everything that we study in language arts has to do with communication. You're trying to say something to somebody else in a way that they can understand, and hopefully you can get your point across. So the purpose of what we're talking about today is usually when you're talking to a person far away from you that you've maybe never met before. This is going to be a skill that will be valuable to you when you're going off into the adult world of having to send emails to maybe get into college, or maybe you're applying for college, or maybe you're trying to get a job, or you're already working at a job. By the time you're a teenager, you're going to be thinking about like what you want to do as a career, and the ability to write well and write professionally will definitely help you. One of the fastest ways for a person that works at a job to tell, that somebody isn't really professional is when they send them an email or write them something in writing that is full of errors or isn't written well. People that work in businesses or at colleges usually take those and just kind of set them aside or put them in the trash as somebody that they're not going to pay a lot of attention to, or they're not necessarily going to hire that person, because people definitely can decide, get an impression of you based on how you write. So we're going to go over some simple tips that you can follow today to write better in terms of the emails that you send and the professional business letters that you send. So first off, let's see who's here today. In the attendees, I see Ariana, Ashmita, Ethan, Fallon, Hartley, Isaiah, Isha, Isis, Jacob, Julia, Logan, Lorna. I see Lewis, Mario, Milo, Nate, Ron Beer, Shanna, Shristi, Sophia, Vanessa. There's one attendee, their name always shows up as VS. Hello to you too. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're here today. This webinar is sort of aimed at probably like teenagers up through, the end of middle school up through high school. So if you decided to watch today, but you're not entering the, high school or college or the working world soon, you're welcome to watch too. If you have any questions, just write them in the Q&A box, so that if anything I say, if you don't understand it, we'll try to get it answered and cleared up. So also, today is the last day of our virtual Spirit Week. Today is Green Day, so I'm wearing my Delphian school shirt, my Delphi baseball cap. Yeah, I hope some of you at home are wearing green too for fun. All right. So the first thing that we're going to go over this is our email and letter etiquette for real life tips. Professional emails. I thought that we should start with emails because honestly, in this modern world that we're living in, we all send a lot more emails than letters. As a teacher, I send emails all the time. Most of your parents probably send and receive emails every day. Some of us might receive, tens or dozens or even 100 emails. Our inboxes are always full. So I know that I write a lot more emails than typed up letters, so I thought that we could start there. So when you're writing an email, here are some of the things that I want you to be thinking about. First off, every email has a part up at the top called the subject line. And the subject line, many of you may have already sent emails before, but if you're sending them, it might just be to friends or family members. And maybe you don't even use the subject line, or maybe whatever you put in the subject line is short, or, it's not the most professional words that you could use. And what I mean by professional is when we're talking about something that's professional, we mean that it's what a person in a profession, like a business person, who is trying to write and communicate with respect and following sort of the formal rules of how adults speak to each other. That's what you're trying to do when you write in a professional way. So in the subject line of your email, you wouldn't use something like, up here on the screen, this is a made-up email address that I created for this activity today. Here in my subject line, I wouldn't write something like, open this, lowercase with no real information there. Let's say I'm going to write to somebody that I met, and they said that they might have a job that's open, like a summer job, and I'm interested in it, and they gave me their email address. In my subject line, I'm going to write something that kind of tells the person, maybe reminds them, who this is and what I'm writing about. I want it to be using proper English, hopefully proper grammar, and it communicates a very short message of what the subject of this email is. So I might say, asking about the open job you mentioned. In a subject line, you don't have to put a period at the end. You don't need punctuation all the time. But you would still want to use things like apostrophes if there is a word that possesses something, we would still want to use the correct punctuation there. I might say, in regard to John's email. That means like having to do with John's email. If somebody wrote to me about John's email and I want to write back to them about it, I might make my subject line, it's short and sweet, and it gives them the information that they need to know about. And it's using correct capitalization. The beginning of the sentence is capitalized. The word John is capitalized. It uses an apostrophe between the N and the S. It doesn't have to have a period at the end, but it is using all the other rules of what this is about. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is use formal names. When you're writing a business email, especially to somebody that you don't know, you don't start out calling them by their first name. Let's say I met this person and they said they have an open job. I wouldn't, let's say their name is Frank. And I wouldn't probably write Frank at the beginning of my email. I would probably say instead, let's say his last name is Smith. Dear Mr. Smith. Even though he told me his name is Frank, I'm still going to call him Mr. Smith because I'm trying to show respect to this person. This is the first time I've ever written to them. I don't know them as like a friend yet, so I'm going to try to be professional by calling them Mr. Let's say I met Lisa Johnson. I would say, Dear Miss Johnson. Usually that abbreviation MS dot, Miss Johnson is used like that because you don't know necessarily the person's, if they're married or not. So you just say Miss for any professional woman that you meet. Usually if the person is married, you put the R there, so it's Dear Mrs. Johnson, but it's more professional just to say Dear Miss Johnson for any professional woman that you're writing to. All right, so next up, as you're writing, you want to organize your thoughts. You shouldn't just write anything that comes to mind in any order that it comes to your mind. As you can see here in my example email, I haven't actually written here who it's going to yet. If I wrote their email address, and let's say I'm in the middle of typing my email and somehow I accidentally hit send, if I don't have their email address there yet and I hit send, it's going to say error. You have to say who this is going to. that's a way that you can save yourself from making a mistake that might be a little bit embarrassing. Sending something that is only half written or is not really written as professionally yet as you want it to be, you'll be a lot safer to just leave. That word there, recipient, means who it's going to, by the way. Just leave that blank until you're done writing. If I leave it blank, I can write and rewrite my message until I'm really happy with it. And then I can write their email address in there at the end when I know that I'm ready to send it. If you ask your parents, I think pretty much every adult has accidentally sent an email that they weren't really ready to send. So that's an easy way to try to avoid that. All right, so let's say I met Miss Johnson and she told me about a summer job that I'm interested in. So let's say maybe I make my subject line interest in the summer job you mentioned at the restaurant. I'm just pretending I met this person at a restaurant and they told me about a summer job. So interest in the summer job you mentioned at the restaurant. Hopefully when they see that subject line, they'll go, oh, I met that nice young person the other day and they're writing to me about the job I told them about. So I start off my email, Dear Miss Johnson, thank you for taking the time to tell me about the summer job when we met at the restaurant. I am very interested in the opportunity. I can just kind of start writing my thoughts here. I can just, you know, go along as I think about what I want to say. I could also probably write an outline. Just like when you're writing an essay for school, you could write an outline for your email if you wanted to. If this is like an important message to you, like you really want this summer internship or you really want this job, take the time to organize your thoughts and say what, you know, create an outline for what you want to write about. So I could say, I make a little outline here, and that's just sort of like a rough order of what my thoughts are going to be in this communication. Let's say I write down for my outline why I'm interested, why I'd be the best person for the job, telling about my previous internship, thanking them for the opportunity. So I've created like a little outline here that I could go through and fill in. I could move my the parts of my email around. I could write it all out and decide when I get to the end, I'm like, oh, I actually said I said up here at the beginning, thank you for telling me about the summer job. And at the end, I thanked them. Maybe I don't want to say that twice. So take the time when writing a professional email to, you know, move things around, delete things that aren't quite the way that you wanted to say them. Get it really perfect. And part of that, of course, is, well, my step 4 here, be polite. Definitely say, you know, your pleases and your thank yous. You don't want to say like, hey, I'm the person for that job, you know, give it to me. I don't think any of you would ever do that, but you're trying to have really good manners when you're writing a business email. You definitely do want to say thank you. You definitely want to kind of like, don't demand things, but propose things. Like, I think a good way of doing this would be, or if you're interested, you can call me about this opportunity. You don't want to order somebody around in an email or a letter that you're writing. And lastly, proofread. Proofreading means once I finish this email, I need to read it over a few times. I need to make sure that I didn't actually say summer with, you know, 1 M up here. A lot of email programs, Gmail, the most common program that a lot of people use, They give you these little red lines underneath to tell you when something is misspelled. You can right click on that and see what their suggestions are. Oh, I misspelled summer. But don't depend on that. If you spell a word correctly, but it's the wrong word, you know, Gmail and other programs might miss that. If I wrote, for example, oh, well, it spotted that one. So talking, like tick and talk, like the sounds that a clock makes. Let's see if I say, thank you for talking the time to tell me about the summer job. So talking is spelled correctly. I meant to write taking, but I accidentally wrote talking. Right now, Gmail has not spotted that because I wrote talking correctly. It's not the right word there, though. So again, somebody reading your email or reading your letter, if you make spelling errors or you make, you know, common grammar mistakes, this person might start judging you. They might have been interested in you when they met you for a job or an opportunity, but if they see, thank you for talking the time to tell me about the summer job, that person might start thinking like, oh, this person's attention to detail, their ability to write professionally, their interest might go down. So you might be the perfect person for the job. You might be the perfect person for that internship. But if you make silly mistakes like that, you can kind of take yourself out of the running. They're the best, most interesting internships and jobs and opportunities in life usually have a lot of people all trying to do that thing. So in order to achieve the things that you want to achieve in your life, you can't make silly mistakes when you're going for it. It's really important to study things like grammar, study things like writing, so that you're really giving yourself the best chance and the best opportunity to make a great impression and have great communication with the people that you are talking to and working with, and you know, the people that you're going to go to try to, you know, achieve things. Impress them with really good writing, with really good communication. Don't make silly mistakes. All right, so let's just pretend here that I've written several paragraphs. I haven't written them yet, but we can all pretend. So after I've written a few paragraphs of my email, keeping it, I don't want to make it too long. I want to make my email long enough that it covers all the information, but I don't want to bore the person. I don't want to make them go, oh my gosh, this email is so long. So after I've had a few paragraphs of communication, you want to have a polite way of ending off. The most common one is to say, sincerely, let's say my name is John Dragon. That's the email address I made up. Sincerely, John Dragon. Because it's an email address, when you hit send and it goes to them, they will immediately have a way of replying back to you. So when we talk in a minute about professional letters, in letters, you actually include a lot more information about, you know, your phone number and email address and other ways to contact you. In emails, that's not as important. If you wanted to, you could put your address and your phone number down here. I could say, sincerely, John Dragon, 503-555-1234. And you could give them your address, you know, 123 Main Street, Snakewater, Montana, 45698. You know, you could leave your information here, but in an opening email, when you're just getting in communication with somebody, you're just contacting them, this kind of information isn't usually as important. Because you're emailing them, they will have an easy way to email you back. So that is much more important. If you've ever seen that in a message, it's more important when you're writing a business letter. So yeah, those are the main points we're going to go over for professional emails. If you have any questions about any of the email information we just went over, feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and I will take a look for those. Hello to all the people that have already said hi in the Q&A box. Hi, guys. And a few people tell me that they're wearing green today. That is awesome. I'm glad to hear you guys are wearing green. Isha and Shanna. Very cool. One person said that they came in late and they're asking what we're talking about today. You may have already figured out from what we're talking about, but we're going over how to write professional emails and professional business letters so that you can communicate professionally when you are in the, when you're maybe going to be trying to apply to college or applying for a job in the working world. And then once you get a job too, you still want to be able to write professionally. So tips for that. All right, so one viewer says, what is an internship? An intern is usually a younger person that is getting some experience working at a job. Sometimes they are paid some money for that. Sometimes, depending on the rules and the laws and the way it's set up, sometimes it's not a paid position. But it's a way to start working somewhere to get experience and learn about it so that you can kind of decide, is this the kind of job that I want to do when I grow up? Or maybe you're doing it to try to make connections with a company. For example, our students at Delphian, we encourage them to do internships in the areas that they're interested in going into as an adult. So if somebody is interested in being a doctor when they grow up, and they could try to get an internship at a doctor's office where they would get to maybe work with some of the people in the doctor's office and like learn more about what it's like to be a doctor. And sometimes a person, when they do that internship, they decide, oh, I don't really like, I don't really want to do this job. And that's actually a really good, result of an internship, is learning what you don't want to do so that you don't waste a lot of time kind of going to college for that thing when you're actually, you're not that interested in it. The other great result of an internship is you go out and you do it and you gain some life experience and you learn more about that job and you go, oh, I love working in this area. I really want to be a lawyer or a doctor or an artist or whatever area that you did your internship in. So I hope that helps. If you have more questions about that, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. All right, let's see if there's any other questions here. One person says, do you have to write Mrs. or Mr.? When you're writing a professional email or letter, yeah, you should write Mr. or Miss usually. If you definitely know that if it's a woman that you're writing to and you definitely know that she's married, you could write Mrs., but usually it's more professional to just write Miss anyway. If you were writing a letter to maybe your teacher or somebody that you do have a more familiar connection with, you could write a letter to them that says, Dear Mrs. Smith. That would be fine. But when you're writing an email to somebody that maybe you've only met briefly or you've never met at all, it's a much safer bet and it's a much more professional way to communicate to just say Miss. Anyway, either way, you should definitely say Dear Mr. Smith or Dear Miss Smith. It's kind of what people in the working world and in the professional world expect. They don't usually expect to be called by their first name if they haven't met you before. Once you know somebody well and you communicate that to them a lot, it's usually fine to call them by their first name if it's still respectful to do so. Or sometimes if the person tells you to. You might have a business relationship with another person and they say, oh, just call me Linda. That's totally fine. So then in the rest of your communication with them, refer to them the way that they asked to be referred to. Another attendee says, what's the difference between an intern and a volunteer? So A volunteer is usually a person that they are working in an area, but they're doing it usually because it's like an organization that maybe helps people, and the person is doing it because they just want to give their time and they want to give their help, and they don't expect any payment at all. For example, our students, we go in the middle school, we go to a food bank where companies and farms donate food, and we help them organize it and then give it out to people in need that are hungry, that don't have enough food. When we go and do that, we volunteer. We're there doing it for free. We're not expecting to be paid. We're just doing it because it's a good life experience and because we want to help other people. Maybe you can volunteer a little bit or a lot. You can volunteer at any age. Children can volunteer. Adults can volunteer. Everybody can volunteer. That's different from an intern in that an intern usually is somebody that is interested in a field or in a job. They're usually being an intern and doing an internship because they are on the path to seeking a job in that area, usually. I mean, you can do internships in different, businesses or different fields, but an intern is definitely somebody that, if all goes well, they may find that they really want to work at that job, and maybe they meet people, they make a really good impression. Maybe they're trying to get a job at that company. Somebody could do an internship at Google, for example, at the company Google. And if, the people that they work with there really like them, they could maybe apply for a job there when they graduate from college or, whatever, path they're taking to try to get a job. So again, a volunteer is more like you just want to help and you're giving your time and your effort for free. An intern is usually you are following the path to seeing if you want to work in that job. And an internship is like a good way to get started in doing that. Another viewer says, are there specific things that you have to include for a specific type of email? For example, if you needed a job or if you need a certain resource. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the situation. If you were writing an email because you're trying to get a job with somebody, you would definitely want to talk about why you want the job, why you think you're the best person for the job, maybe describing, a little bit of your experience or your education. But if you're actually formally trying to apply for a job, and that means you're trying to officially tell the company, I want to work for you, there is a second thing that people usually send in called a resume. We don't have enough time to cover that today. We could maybe do that in another webinar in the future if there's interest. But your email, your professional email that you send it's kind of your opening communication. And you could attach to it or also send your resume, which is it's a much more formal list of your experience, your education, why you're saying you are the best person for the job that's available. But your business or formal email that you're writing is kind of your opening. It's your first communication to them, letting them know that you're interested or that you have something to say. Depending on what that formal or professional email is, sometimes it has nothing to do with a job. You might be sending a email to a newspaper telling them that you want to place an advertisement in their newspaper. You would still want to send a formal professional email where you might say, you might look up online that the name of the person who, puts advertisements in the newspaper, it lists their name. So you say, Dear Miss Smith, I would like to place an advertisement in your newspaper. Here's the information, etc. So yes, it definitely depends on what type of email you're writing. There's definitely going to be different things that you would want to include in them. But these tips kind of cover any type of email. We want to make sure that we have a good subject line. We want to make sure that we use formal ways of addressing people like dear Mr. or Miss. We always want to organize our thoughts so that we have a good outline, and we always want to proofread. And that word proofread just means going through it and making sure there are no spelling errors, no grammar errors, that we have really communicated exactly what we were trying to say. Okay, so there are a lot more questions in here, which is awesome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to talking about formal letters now. And if you still have questions at the end of the webinar, I will stick around after the video ends, and I will try to type responses if there are more questions. Okay, so next up is professional letters. Okay, so professional letters, some of the, a lot of the information of like general advice is going to be the same, but the specifics of how it looks on the page are going to be different. And the first one is that professional business letters have a lot more information included on them. And here's why. I'm going to jump over to, I found in the program Google Docs, which is a part of the Google group of online programs. Google Docs is one that you can write essays in, you can write letters or all sorts of different things, and it's free. And they have up here at the top what are called templates. And a template is basically they've kind of made up a pretend version of something so that you can open it up and put all of your information in, but they kind of guide you. So when you first open up Google Docs and you're all logged in, you'll see this list of things up here at the top. The first one is just a blank document. It just looks like a blank piece of paper. But we're going to skip over that. And what they have here, the first one is a blank letter. And it's actually a professional letter format. So I'm going to open that up so that you can all see what that looks like. So let's go through the information that they include here. In a formal professional business letter, you first include up at the top your information. So see how it's all listed out here? It says your name, then it gives like an address, it gives a phone number, it gives a email address. Then it has the date, and it has all the person's information that you're writing to. The reason for this is I want you to imagine that you get a letter in the mail. Let's imagine that when you get the envelope in the mail, it might be addressed to you on the front. So it has your address on there, and up in the corner, it has the address of where it was sent from. Let's say you open up the envelope, you pull the letter out, and maybe you place that envelope to the side. Maybe it falls off the counter or the desk. Maybe it accidentally gets thrown away. If the letter doesn't have any address information on it, it just says, you know, dear Mr. Smith, I am interested in the open position at your company. And you read the letter in it, it's all great. And you're like, oh, this sounds like a really good, person for the job. You turn it over and there's no contact information. That means there's no way of communicating back to them. They're never going to be able to talk to you. So the way that professional business letters handle this is that they include all of that contact information right on the letter themselves. So it starts off, it has your name. My pretend name here today is John Dragon at 123 Main Street in Snakewater, Montana. Whatever the zip code for our pretend address would be, etc. Whatever my pretend phone number is here. You would, of course, in writing your professional letter, you would want to put in your actual information when you're writing to them because you want them to be able to reach you again. You want to make sure there are no typos in this information. When I put my John Dragon 777 at gmail.com. I'm giving them all the information they need here to write back to me or to email me or to call me. If I'm interested in this job or I have a business reason for contacting them, I want to give them all the methods that they would need to write back to me. Up here at the top, the date today is the 10th of April in 2020. And the nice thing about this template that Google Docs gives you, and a lot of other writing programs like Microsoft Word or programs on an Apple computer, the great thing about this is I don't have to remember all of this off the top of my head. I don't have to remember that, oh, I'm supposed to put my email address there too. The template will fill all that in, and I just kind of have to go in and replace what they said. So let's say the name of the person I met that offered, said that I should apply for the summer internship. So this here, I can write their full name, Lisa Smith, CEO. That's just a fancy way of saying they are the boss of the whole company. They are the main person at, let's just say, let's say Apple Computers. I know Lisa Smith is not really the CEO, but for our purposes today, she is. So Lisa Smith, CEO, Apple Computers, 123 First Street, San Francisco, California, etc. This is where you need to make sure you actually have all of their information correct. 99920, whatever their address is. Make sure it's correct there. This will be part of your proofreading step before you send this letter. You're going to check and double check and triple check that you have their name spelled correctly, that you have the right address, that you've correctly written your own name, that your address is correct, because again, you don't want any silly mistakes interrupting or messing up your communication. Okay, so in the email itself, in the letter itself, you want to follow the same sort of rules as when we were talking about emails. I still want to say, Dear Miss Smith. In a template like this, they just put a bunch of kind of gibberish words. These are words, I think this is taken from an old language called Latin, but they've just it's either Latin or just made up stuff. But they just dump that in here to kind of fill the space and show you what it should look like when there are several paragraphs of writing there. But this is where we take over and we say, Dear Miss Smith, I am very interested in the summer internship you mentioned when we met at the restaurant. And you fill in all your information here. You write your whole message. The same way that we talked about the email, you want to organize your thoughts. You can work off of a outline. You could just write all, the safer thing about writing a letter like this is there's no way to accidentally send it before you're done. You can work here in Google Docs or Microsoft Word and just write it and rewrite it. You can show it to another person. You could say, Mom or Dad, I'm really interested in this summer internship. I'm writing a letter to them, and can you read it over and tell me what you think? You can get feedback from other people and really make your professional letter perfect. Really make it say exactly what you want it to, and try to proofread out of it all of the errors and mistakes so it really represents you really, really well. At the end, when you've written your whole message, sincerely is a good closing way to end off. The word sincere means you really mean what you're saying. So if you say sincerely, it's kind of just an old-fashioned, but still used today, way of saying, goodbye, and I really meant what I said. So you can stick with sincerely. It may be old-fashioned, but it still works great. With a less formal email, if somebody asked earlier about what if I'm writing to a friend or a family member? Well, if you're writing to a friend or family member, you can actually remove a lot of this information that's up there. Let's say I'm writing to my, to a cousin, I probably don't need to put any of that address stuff up there. Even if they lose the envelope or something, they'll know that I was the person that wrote to them. They probably have your address on file if they're a family member or a close friend. So I could just start with like, dear Jim, if that's my good friend Jim or my cousin Jim. I could even, if it's not formal, if I'm not trying to be professional, I could even say, hi Jim. And it's okay to just be a lot more familiar with them, which means you're treating them like they're much closer to you because they are close to you. You don't have to have that sort of professional distance and respect that you need to when writing to a person that you don't know. And then at the end of your message, you could just say something like, best, John Dragon, or just John if you know them really, really well and they know who it's coming from. Or with like a family member or a friend, you could say, love, Johnny. And that's okay too. So those are the ways that a professional letter are different than an email. And the main ones, again, are just that there's usually that information up at the top of the page. We want to keep that information there. It's kind of a safety way of making sure that they don't lose your contact information and that they can write back to you. Because if you write a great enough letter and you get them interested in what you have to say, hopefully they will be writing back to you or calling you or emailing you. So we have a few minutes here at the end for me to take some questions. So I'm going to look in that Q&A box and I'll answer as many as we can, but we only have a few minutes left. So I might have to end off the video and write some of the answers. Here is a great question. It says, when a person replies to your email and uses his or her first name at the end, can I use his or her first name then at that point? That's a great question. I probably wouldn't right away. If I wrote to somebody because I was trying to get a job with them, or I otherwise was trying to show a lot of respect to that person, and I called them Mr. Smith or Miss Johnson or whatever, and they write, sincerely, Lisa Johnson. I don't think that after one, reply or one email that I'm really on friendly, close terms to this person yet. I would continue responding to them as, dear Mr. Smith, thank you for your reply. I accept the offer of the job, or whatever your reply is. You definitely want to wait for either the person to tell you, oh, and by the way, just call me Jim. You want to either wait for that or for you to have had enough communication with them that you definitely know that that person is close enough to you that you can call them by their first name. I'll give you one example that as a teacher, when I write to when I write emails to the parents of my students, there are, a good number of them that I know them well and I write to them by their first names. But in the past, I've had certain people that I wrote to that I knew that that person, was kind of formal enough, and maybe you might even say old-fashioned enough, that they really did like being referred to as Mr. Smith, or, what their name was. And they usually wrote to me as they would call me Mr., by my last name. And that's just the way that they always wrote. And the entire time that we were in email communication, we never actually dropped out of that formal way of writing. So it's really a question of like knowing who you're writing to and trying to follow sort of like what the respectful way that they want to communicate to you is. All right. Another person says, can you intern as a librarian? That's a great question. I hope so. I love libraries. So if you're interested in interning as a librarian, probably the best thing to do would be to go to your local library when you can go to the library again and ask them. Ask them if they have an internship program, and maybe they do. One person asks, when it says Google Docs, is that short for Google Documents? Yes. Google Docs is just the short way that they refer to documents, which is things that you write. One person says, when mail is in your mailbox, is there always an email? Do you mean if there's mail in your physical? I think you probably don't mean if there's mail in your physical mailbox, like at your house. I think you're asking about if there's an email like in your email inbox. It'll usually say in your email inbox, there'll be like there's a certain part that says inbox, and there will be a number next to it if somebody sent you one. Right here, for example, I'm going to close this pretend email. This is just a made up email address that I came up with. It wouldn't usually look like this because it would usually be full of messages that people were sending to me. Just right here in this area would be a list of all the emails that people sent to me. And there would usually be a number here next to inbox. It would say, if I had 5 messages, it would say 5. And that's how I would know how many emails people had sent to me. All right, let's see. One more question before we end off the video. Oh, here's a fast one. What does Gmail mean? Gmail is just short for Google Mail. It's the Google company's email program. So they shortened it to Gmail. One person asked on the date in that template, why did it say 20XX? It's because it's a template. It's letting you fill in your own information. So it's the year 2020, so we can fill in 20. They can leave that template there for the next 80 years, and you know it'll be good for 2020, 2021, 2022. Yeah, so they just put an XX there to fill in the last 2 digits. Here is a great last question. This viewer asks, when should you email someone and when should you write a letter to someone? That's a great question. A formal letter can usually or often show a higher level of like being formal about something. You could maybe send somebody a letter if you want to be kind of even more official or formal than sending an email. Everybody in the business world and in the grown-up world uses email these days, but I think it kind of, when it first came out, when email was sort of first invented and came into wide use, it was considered less professional than still writing formal letters. These days it's considered a lot more professional, but I would say there's still sort of a general feeling amongst adults that if you really, really, really are professional and serious about something, you would probably send a written letter about it. Let's say when the government sends you formal information, they always send a letter about it. Usually when people are getting married and they send out an invitation, not always, but most of the time they'll send out a paper invitation. It's just a way of showing kind of the importance or specialness or amount of formalness of something is sending it with a formal written down on paper and put in an envelope letter. Who knows, maybe email will get there someday, but it still is kind of it's still professional, but it's a little bit less important or special or formal than writing it down on paper. And whatever situation you have to communicate about, you'll have to kind of decide for your situation which one you want to do. A company that has an open job, they might say they want you to apply to that job with a letter and your resume printed out. A lot of other companies might say sending an email or just submitting that information over the internet is fine. It's really a situation of find out what is needed for your situation. And you can always ask your parents what would be the right one. You could ask other people in the same situation, what would be the right way to communicate about an email or letter. Just do your research and try to find out. But these tips that we did today can kind of be overall tips for either situation. So we are out of time. So we're going to end off now. Thank you all for attending today and asking excellent questions. We'll be back next week with a lot more webinars. I'll still be teaching language arts webinars. And if you're interested, let us know about resumes. That's something that we could take up if you're interested in learning about how you write a resume for a job that you want to get. And as usual, I will stick around for a few minutes in the Q&A box and answer more questions. So feel free to ask there if you want to know about something. Bye, everyone. See you next week.